Hello and welcome back to Clarkenomics. In this video, we're going to talk about a very important concept relating to international trade called comparative advantage. So, what we're going to do to start things off is we're going to revisit something from some of the earliest videos in this course. Production possibilities. You might remember something called a production possibilities frontier, and so we're going to begin with those. So, to do this, let's imagine that there's an island. We'll just call it Island A because I'm not very creative. And we'll look at what island A can produce. We'll say in this island, they only produce two things. They produce fish and they produce coconuts, right? So those will be the two items that there's a trade-off in between. They can use their resources towards fish production or coconut production. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fix the resource. We're going to keep that the same. So we're going to say in one day, right? Our input will be time, and we'll fix that, and we'll say in one day, Island A could produce 10 fish and 0 coconuts. So what this would mean is they're only producing fish. If they use all of their time to produce fish, they can produce 10 fish. And if they do that, they're not producing any coconuts at all. So that's one extreme. The other extreme would be, of course, if they didn't produce any fish and they only produced coconuts. In one day, if Island A went this route, they could produce 0 fish and 20 coconuts, right? So these are the two different extremes. So we can set ourselves up a production possibilities frontier with our axes. We'll put fish on the x-axis and we'll put coconuts on the y-axis. It actually doesn't really matter which one goes where, so take your pick. But we can plot this data, right? So the first option is 10 fish, 0 coconuts. 0 coconuts means we must be on the x-axis, right? The y value is equal to 0. And so we'll just put 10 there. And so that would be this option right here. 10 fish, 0 coconuts. And then we could plot this option. 20 coconuts, right? There's our y value is 20, and 0 fish. And of course, these are the two extremes, but there's lots of other production combinations that this country could opt for. And so we can create a line, a straight line, just like this one, right? This is what we might remember is called a production possibilities frontier. Any combination of fish and coconuts on this line is an efficient point of production, a combination of fish and coconuts. Anything outside of this frontier is impossible with the resources that they have, and anything inside of the curve is possible, but it's what we call underutilizing because they are not making as much stuff as they could. So this is Island A's production possibilities. We're going to look at Island B's neighbor, Island B, and Island B produces the same two goods, fish and coconuts. So Island B in one day, if they only produce fish, can produce 60 units of fish. If they're only producing fish, 0 coconuts, or they could produce no fish and 30 coconuts, 30 units of coconuts. And so just like we did with Island A, we can create a production possibilities frontier. Theirs is going to look a little different though, right? Because they can produce 60 units of fish all the way out here if they only produce fish, and 30 units of coconuts if they only produce coconuts. And this is their PPF, their production possibilities frontier. So before we get into the heart of the lesson, we're going to talk about an idea called absolute advantage. An absolute advantage is a pretty simple idea. It's when one nation can produce something better than another nation can. So for instance, we have two islands, Island A and Island B. What I've done here is I've organized all of this information into a nice, neat table. So Island A, if they only produce fish, can produce 10 fish in a day. If they only produce coconuts, they can produce 20. Island B, on the other hand, if they only produce fish, can produce 60 fish. And Island B, if they only produce coconuts, can produce 30 coconuts. So it's all the information we already had from the two previous slides, now just condensed into one nice little table. And here I put produced in one day because, again, we're keeping the resource constant in one day. Usually you won't see that written here. You'll just see fish, coconuts, Island A, Island B. So let's take a look and ask ourselves, which island has the absolute advantage in producing fish? Which island's better at producing fish? Well, that would be Island B, right? Because Island B can produce 60 units of fish in one day as compared to Island A, which can only produce 10 units of fish in one day. So Island B is much better at fish production. Which island is better at producing coconuts? Well, that would also be Island B, because island B can produce 30 units of coconuts in a day, whereas island A can only sadly produce 20 units of coconuts in a day. So island B has the absolute advantage in both of these products. So here's the question that is at the heart of what we're doing today. Should these islands trade with each other? Now let's think about what it means to trade with each other. If two people or two islands or two countries are making a trade, it must mean that they both expect to be better off as a result, right? Nobody's forcing anybody to do anything. Anyone's only going to trade if it's better for them. So a trade has to be mutually beneficial to both parties in order for it to happen. So can Island A and Island B both benefit from trading with each other? That's the question we're posing here. At first, it doesn't seem so. It seems like Island A could do a lot better from trading, but it doesn't necessarily look like Island B would be better off by trading with Island A. It looks like they should just keep to themselves. But as it turns out, the answer is not so simple. So let's revisit the idea of trade-offs, right? A trade-off is when you give up something in order to get something else. Different than a trade. We're just talking about a trade-off here. So for instance, Island A, when they want to produce fish, they have to give up coconuts. If they want to produce coconuts, they have to give up fish, right? Resources are not infinite. There is scarcity, and so we have to make choices. So, as we know from Island A, if they choose this option down here, 10 fish, they're giving up the ability to produce any coconuts at all, right? They're only producing fish. So to produce this point, the opportunity cost is this point. To produce 10 fish, they must have to give up 20 coconuts of production, right? See, every time they go from 0 fish all the way to 10 fish, they're losing coconuts, all the way until coconuts equals 0. So the opportunity cost, if you want to talk about it like that, of producing 10 fish is 20 coconuts. So this is where it gets a little complicated, right? But essentially, if I were to ask you, okay, how many coconuts do they have to give up to produce just one fish? The answer is 2, right? We're just simplifying a ratio here, right? 10 is to 20 as 1 is to 2, right? We're just dividing 10 by 10 to get 1 and 20 by 10 to get 2. So every time Island A produces one more fish, they have to give up 2 coconuts. So you can imagine all kinds of little points in between here, where X might be 1, Y would be 18. X might be 2, Y would be 16. And all of those points fall along this line until, when producing 10 fish, you've given up the ability to produce any coconuts at all. Now, we can also do it the opposite way, right? We can say if Island A wants to produce 20 coconuts, they can do that, but they're going to give up the ability to produce any fish as a result. So if they produce 20 coconuts, they're giving up 10 fish. Simplify this again. How much fish do they give up to produce 1 coconut? Well, to produce 1 coconut, they're giving up half a unit of fish, right? We're just simplifying ratios here. 20 divided by 20 is 1. 10 divided by 20 is 1/2. So every time they produce 1 coconut, they're giving up half a unit of fish. So essentially, if they produce 1, right here, if the y value is 1, then the x value corresponding is going to be 9.5. If this value is 2, this is going to be 9, right? It's just the slope of the line basically here. All right, that's Island A. Island B, if Island B produces 60 fish, right down there, they're going to give up 30 coconuts. So if they produce 1 fish, they're going to give up half a unit of coconuts, right? Same thing as before. If Island B chooses to produce 30 units of coconuts, they're giving up the ability to produce 60 fish. Simplify that down. To produce 1 coconut, they're giving up the opportunity to produce 2 fish. So this whole thing of ratios and trade-offs is crucially important when it comes to looking at international trade, because we're going to talk about something next called comparative advantage. Okay, so that might have been a little bit confusing, but we have a good hint here, right? We're going to calculate the opportunity cost of producing things. And the hint is other goes over. So this is all the same information as before. We've already solved for these things, but we'll just take it step by step. Island A, what's the opportunity cost of producing a fish? That's the answer we're looking for right here. So if we're wondering about fish, take the other number, 20, and put it over 10, right? 20 over 10 is 2. So the opportunity cost of producing a fish is 2 coconuts. Fine. What's the opportunity cost of producing a coconut? Well, take the other 10 and put it over. Oh, I'm doing the wrong one. Sorry about that. Let's go back down here. For island B, the opportunity cost of producing a fish? Take the other number, 30, and put it over 1/2. Now up here we go. Other is 10 over 20 is 1/2. Other is 60 over 30 is 2. So just remember, other goes over. Now, why does this matter? It matters because the whole idea of trade has to do with comparative advantage. This is different than absolute advantage, although it sounds a little bit similar. Comparative advantage is when one nation can produce a product at a lower opportunity cost than another nation. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, comparative advantage is much more important than absolute advantage. So let's take a look here. Which island has the comparative advantage in producing fish? All right, let's take a look. Island A's opportunity cost of producing a fish is 2 coconuts. They have to give up 2 coconuts to produce 1 fish. Island B has to give up half a coconut to produce 1 fish. Whose opportunity cost is lower? Well, that would be Island B. So Island B has what we call a comparative advantage in producing fish because they can do it at a lower opportunity cost. 1/2 is less than 2. Who has the the lower opportunity cost in producing coconuts? Well, that would be Island A. Island A, to produce 1 coconut, only has to give up half a unit of fish. If Island B wants to produce a coconut, they have to give up 2 whole fish. Island A's opportunity cost is much lower, and so we would say they have a comparative advantage in producing coconuts. So here's a rule for you. If one nation, when you have problems like this, if one nation has a comparative advantage in one thing, the other nation must have a comparative advantage in the other thing. That is, if you do this and determine that Island B has a comparative advantage in producing fish, Island A must have a comparative advantage in the opposite thing. They can't be the same unless the ratios are the same, right? It has to work out that way. So that's just a hint for solving these types of problems. So why does this matter? Let's get back to our main question here. Should these islands trade? Can both islands benefit from trading with each other? And the answer is, because I hinted at it, yes. Believe it or not, both of these islands would be better off if they traded. And the reason is actually pretty straightforward. It's because each island has a different comparative advantage. So Island A, for example, has a comparative advantage in producing coconuts. So they're going to specialize in just making coconuts. Specialization means focusing on one thing. So Island A is not going to produce fish at all anymore. They're only going to focus on what they're best at between those two things. They're going to produce coconuts. Island B, as we determined, has a comparative advantage in fish, so they're going to stop producing coconuts at all. They're only going to make what they're best at between those two products. They're going to make fish. And, we're going to assume that they need both of these products. So if they're only specializing in one, well, how are they going to get the other? They're going to trade for it. So each island has an ability to benefit from trade. So for instance, let's look at Island B, because Island B was the one that had the absolute advantage in both things, right? They were just a better island overall. And you might have thought at the beginning here, like, well, how could they possibly benefit from trading with the inferior Island A? Let's take a look. Island B, let's imagine that the terms of trade here were 1 fish for 1 coconut. Both islands agree, hey, 1 fish for 1 coconut, that's easy, let's do it. It doesn't have to be that, but I'm just going to make it that for this example. Now remember Island B. Without trade, every time they wanted to produce 1 coconut, they had to give up 2 fish. In other words, the opportunity cost of producing a coconut was 2 fish. But with trade, because they're our coconut producer, right? Remember? Island B is our fish producer, right? To get a coconut without trade, they would have had to give up 2 fish. But since they're trading and the terms of trade are 1 fish for 1 coconut, they only have to give up now 1 fish to get a coconut. So in other words, they don't have to give up as much fish to get the same thing because of trade. And that's the whole beauty of comparative advantage and international trade. If everybody just focuses on what they're best at, we can lower costs for everybody. And well, why does lowering costs matter? Lowering costs matters because it can allow us to consume more stuff, right? If things aren't as expensive, it means we can get more stuff. So the simple answer, why do countries trade, is to be able to consume outside of their production possibilities curve, right? So for instance, island B, we're going to stick with them because again, they were the island like it didn't seem that could benefit from trade. Island B, if they weren't trading at all, they might be producing a point like A, right? This is a possible production point with no trade. They can't produce or consume, if they're not trading, anywhere outside of here. Because if you're not trading, you can only consume what you're making. There's nothing coming from anywhere else. So this would be a possible production point with no trade. Even if they decided to specialize in one thing, like point B down here is specializing only in fish, doesn't mean they're trading necessarily, right? Just means they're making only fish. But they still, without trade, cannot consume anywhere outside of this production possibilities frontier at the moment. So, when trade happens, though, we might get a point like point C, right? Point C is not a production option for island B, but it is a consumption option for island B with trade because island A can produce at a lower opportunity cost for the thing that they specialize in, essentially, which is coconuts. Um, Island B's costs to get their hands on a coconut are decreasing. And so they can now consume at a point like C, which would have been impossible to consume at without any trade. So, long story short, trade allows us to be able to consume more because costs are lower, because everybody is specializing in what they're best at and trading for things that they're not specialized in. And so we're going to explore this idea more in subsequent videos, but the entire idea of comparative advantage is very important to international trade. So let's do one more practice problem. Hey, there it is. And then we'll move on. So, in one day, country A can produce, here we go, we're fixing the resource time at one day again, 5 gallons of peanut butter or 30 gallons of jelly if they only produce jelly. Country B can produce 10 gallons of peanut butter or 20 gallons of jelly. Who has the absolute advantage in producing peanut butter? Well, clearly that's Island B, right? They can produce 10 gallons in a day. Island A can only produce 5 gallons. So, country B. Who has the absolute advantage in producing jelly? Well, that should be country A. Country A can produce 30 gallons of jelly. Country B can only produce 20. Who has the comparative advantage in producing peanut butter? So, what is country A's opportunity cost of producing a unit of peanut butter? Other, 30, goes over 5. 30 over 5 is 6. So the opportunity cost for country A is 6 gallons of jelly. For country B, other goes over. 20 over 10 is 2. To produce a unit of peanut butter, country B's opportunity cost is only 2 gallons of jelly. So who has the opportunity cost of producing peanut butter? That would be definitely country B. They only have to give up 2 gallons of jelly instead of 6 gallons of jelly. Well, remember here, because we know that country B has the comparative advantage in producing peanut butter, country A must have the comparative advantage in producing jelly. That's the rule. Now, does that check out? Let's find out. Country A, producing jelly. Other, 5, goes over 30. That's a fraction of 1/6. Country B, producing jelly. Other goes over, 10 over 20 is half, or 1 over 2. 1 over 6 is less than 1 over 2, which means that country A's opportunity cost of producing jelly is lower. That gives them the comparative advantage. So who should specialize in the production of each good? That's our question here. Well, whoever has the lower opportunity cost, aka the comparative advantage. So country B, they should make peanut butter. Country A, they should make jelly. So this is the kind of practice problem you might see. At a more advanced level, you can talk about terms of trade, what is agreeable to both countries, but on a basic level, this is how comparative and absolute advantage work in dictating whether or not two countries should benefit from trade and how they should specialize to do so. Very good. Thank you for watching.